Okay, we'll start with announcements. Mr. Cohen, any announcements this evening?
I do not.
Ms. Howard, Mr. Liverman? No? Okay. Do you want to mention anything about Mary Moss Playground? Or you
Yes. Oh, I guess
you can
I
do
could.
that in
I didn't
reports
know
or-
the other. So just to update, the Mary Moss Playground is on schedule, and we are expecting to have the ribbon cutting on the 20th at 11 a.m. And we chose that time so that the kids from the camp can attend.
Great. And are there any staff announcements? No? Okay. We'll move on to approval of the minutes. Are there any corrections to any of these sets of minutes? And if not, is there a motion to move in block?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Liverman and seconded by Mr. Cohen. And just to clarify, it's the minutes from the closed session of April 9th, 2018, the minutes from April 9th, 2018, closed session for April 23rd, 2018, minutes for April 23rd, 2018, and again, the closed session for May 3rd, 2018. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the minutes all pass. And now we come to comments from the public for items that are not on the agenda, although there are a couple folks who signed up for the tree, and even though it's going to be a report, I encourage you to come up now. So we'll start with Loretta Polinsky.
Okay, can you hear me? My name is Loretta Polinsky. I'm living at 170 Prospect. I've come to urge passage of the Neighborhood Character and Zoning Initiative and to inquire whether it's possible to increase enforcement of items that are already on the books. So I'd like to give an example where currently, if it's more than 400 square feet of impervious area that's being added to a site, there's a requirement to submit a proposed grading plan. So the example of 63 Patton and 65 Patton, a grading plan was submitted, approved, not followed, and with limited enforcement. My home and the Princeton University townhomes actually border the southern edge. And if you look at the grading plan that I handed out, the shaded part represents Barsky's new construction. All of that is no longer available to absorb rainwater. So with the 1,693 square foot addition of impervious area, our backyard transformed from small areas of wetness to being completely submerged, which you can see on the following page. Over 4 months, from January till May of this year, we pled with Daniel Barsky, had quite a lot of help from Jack West, gratefully, and coordinated a combined response from us and Princeton University. But it doesn't seem that that's the right thing to do, to dump the water on the neighbors and then expect them to deal with it. There were piles of excavated soil washing off onto the neighbors. You can see from the Princeton townhouses, the lot, although it isn't very sloped, that soil is a mound, and that mounding is described in your zoning initiative. Jack West explained that there's no requirement to remove the excavated soil to actually follow the grading plan. And that I can't understand. If it's on the books that they're submitting the grading plan, why don't they have to follow it? So dealing And instead of the roof gutters, only the roof gutters, if they're not blocked, get directed to subterranean piping to the stormwater sewer. All the rest of that surface area water comes onto the two neighbors. So, this isn't sustainable, Princeton, is it? Dealing with Barsky's arrogance was not only frustrating, but extremely time-consuming. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for raising this issue. I'd like to share this with Jim Constantine, who is helping us with drafting a second set of the neighborhood character ordinances, which is going to include stricter provisions for grading, and take a look at this. And then I think we just need to look into it more about options that we have. But thank you for raising the issue. And next is Galina.
I also have some visuals which I would like to share. Okay, so I hope you can hear me. So good evening. I'm Galina Chernaya. I'm an owner of 258 Hawthorne Avenue, where the issue with the damaged trees has been getting a lot of attention. And ahead of the schedule for later today, a report on this issue, I would like to share some new information with the council, hoping that it will help to have a more complete picture of the issue. And I would like to start by saying that based on available to me information, now there is a very clear evidence of the violation of the tree protection ordinance by the developer at 260 Hawthorne. And just to remind everyone that the ordinance requires a notification of adjacent property owners of any plans to remove the trees. As you can see on page 1 of submitted materials, 3 trees were removed. No notification was sent out, for which I now have a proof because there was lack of a record of that notification that was provided to me following my OPRA request. Actually, the attached picture on that page shows still standing 2 other trees on 260 Hawthorne, which are under protection by the ordinance, but as you can clearly see, the ordinance is not followed and they are buried under a pile of construction material. So the other point, moving to the next page, I would like to make is that the damage to the trees that are on the property line between 258 and 260 are very severe. And now with close-up pictures, you can see the clusters of roots that were ripped off by the excavator. These roots are considered constructural for those trees. They're in diameter from 5 to 6 inches in diameter. And that raises a very serious concern about the chances of these trees to survive. One tree, unfortunately, was already taken down, one of the protected trees, because of the excavation coming very close to the trunk, and the tree started to lean over my house and had to be removed, taken down. So 5 trees are still standing, but with this level of root damage, it's really not likely that they will survive. And you can see the pictures with the measuring tape there. So that the next page, if you turn to the next page, shows and tells you what in reality the ordinance of a 10-foot setback means. And the developer, RB Homes, was supposed to follow that ordinance. However, in reality, it resulted in excavation coming closer to the property line, as close as 5 feet at certain points, 5 to 7 feet. So the requested by me through OPRA form communications or any information supporting that level of excavation resulted in this piece of paper, which without any name, without signature, which I assume was generated by the arborist, and gives an approximate number of feet as 8 to 9 from the flare of the trunk. The next page is a summary of the measurements that I've taken, the exact measurements, not approximate, and they all range in different measuring points. You can look at the plan where those points were, and those vary from 82-inch to 61-inch, and that is right by the tree trunk. 61-inch, 5 feet, was the excavation close to the tree that unfortunately had to be taken down. So it's not a question in my mind that the ordinance been violated on multiple levels, multiple provisions of that been violated, and I do expect that the council will take an action on it and will subject Barsky to penalties and fines, and will find a way to endorse this ordinance. If an action is not taken, then I do not have other choice as to take this issue to court. Thank you.
Thank you. And we're going to be getting a report on your property in a minute. Is there anybody else who'd like to speak as part of public comment?
Can I just add one more thing? You're welcome to look at those two properties are on the market right now. You can look online how bare that backyard looks, you know, with all the trees having been removed, and a price tag for each part of almost 1.3 million.
Okay, thank you.
So there should be funds to do the right thing in this case.
Okay, thank you. All right, seeing no one else for public comment, I would like to ask if we can amend the agenda to change the order, because Mr. Huff is here to give an update on the Mercer County recycling, and he has a tight deadline tonight, so I'd like to get him up next, and then we'll resume the rest of the agenda. So is there a motion to take up Mercer County recycling bid update next?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Liverman and seconded by Ms. Krummeller. All in favor of amending the agenda?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay.
Thank you very much. I have to get my son, and my wife is in Chicago, so I appreciate your help. She's not going to be able to help. Wanted to give you an update on the bids recently received by Mercer County Improvement Authority, and I do have a slide if I can get some help getting that shown to you. But as some of you may be aware, the county went out to bid for recyclable materials, and they received bids back in June. And on Friday night around 6 o'clock, we got a letter from them. They must have our offices bugged or something. They knew we were talking about them. And we got a letter from them concerning the bids and a future agreement. And the current agreement, which started in January 1, 2014, a 5-year agreement, expires the end of this year. So they went out to bid now in this market to see what they would get as far as responses on recycling. We have not seen the actual bid that they put out on the street. I've asked them for a copy of it now that they've taken in their bids and have given us some information. So we don't really know exactly all the different ways, whether it was one way that they bid this or if there were options or alternatives. But the bottom line is they received bids a couple weeks ago for a new agreement that would start on January 1 and go for 5 years. And the bid that they received was in the amount of, the way they put it out, is for $3.80 per stop, as they call it, or per collection for residential collection of recyclables for a single stream. So when you do the math on that, it comes out for an annual cost in 2015 19 of approximately $287, almost $288,000. This year, for 2018, our annual cost is $204,000. So we are looking at over an $80,000 increase in costs. So we've approached the county. We've asked them. In fact, their email to us on Friday night said that they would be coming and setting up meetings to discuss this with all the municipalities. We've asked them for that to occur sooner than later, so that we can hear from them exactly what their plan is. I understand that their intention, while they're looking for the municipalities to enter a 5-year agreement, their intention with Central Jersey or Solterra, who was the one and only bidder apparently on the project, is to only sign a 1-year agreement with them, so that they can look at next year. It would be 1 year, commit to 1 year with options, but to only do hopefully 1 year, and if the market changes, be able to go back out and rebid it sometime next year and see if they get different results, if the market looks different. My understanding is that the main contributor to this is glass. They're thinking about, I guess the county's thinking about, should they look at redoing their waste management plan and going away from the single stream, looking at taking glass out of it. So there's lots of things that they have that they're thinking about on their level. I know they have a meeting. They meet tomorrow, I believe, at noon. I looked at their agenda. Interestingly enough, I don't see this on their agenda, but I understand they may be talking about it under some new business. So we'll see what comes of it. But that's sort of the update I wanted to give you, is that it does not, I do have hard copies of the spreadsheet that shows that, 5 years from now, by 2023, the cost is going to be almost $319,000. And again, remember, this year we're 204. So it's a major jump. And I know we've had some discussions, should the municipality go out on their own and bid this and see what we would get? Would we get bidders? What would they bid? Waste Management and Republic didn't even bid on the county numbers. I understand they had the documents out, but they didn't bid on it. It was only Solterra. So there's a lot of things we have to get answered, but we wanted to make you, the mayor and I have spoken about it over the last week or so, wanted to make you all aware of what this number is, especially from a budget standpoint, and that we will pursue looking at and getting them in here as quickly as possible, try to get more information. The Public Works Committee meets again next Monday. So to David and Jenny and Tim, who's not here, I'll give you a heads up. Guess what's on our agenda is trash recycling, and what direction we want to be looking at in light of these numbers. So that's where we're at. David.
I know that a couple other towns in our county don't use the county system. Do you know if they're experiencing the same hikes, price hikes?
We have not gone, and if they're under agreements, and unless they have some sort of escalator in the existing agreement, I would assume they're currently protected, but I don't know where everybody else's contracts are, but we will, what's one of the things we'll look into.
Okay.
Is where are other municipalities and what
And
do they
who's doing
plan on
theirs,
doing?
and if theirs can do ours?
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, in
I
a couple
assumed you were
cases,
going to look at that.
I just don't know what they're
Okay.
doing. But it's a good question that we'll look into.
And I'm guessing that you don't really have an answer to this, but I'm curious if you have a sense or how this may be impacting recycling of construction waste. I know we had, a new ordinance that we passed a year or so ago requiring recycling of 50% of construction waste, and I'm wondering if the contractors are getting hit as well.
The information's still coming into us. We're still getting our applications. We're still getting the information. I don't know what it's costing them, but I have to think that, they're getting hit, but, they're recycling different materials.
Right.
More concrete, brick, wood, things of that nature, not getting into the cardboard and the plastics and glass and stuff like this. So different stream. I just don't know what. They all seem to be compliant. The good news is, it appears they're all complying. Thank you very much.
Other questions for Bob? Yeah.
Thank you.
More to follow.
Nice
hopefully,
presentation.
Yeah, hopefully we can have some better options than.
Did we have a
what it looks like.
presentation, or was it just? Oh, okay, because the screen came up. Okay.
Thanks, Bob. Okay, so we'll go back to our regular agenda, and next is a presentation. I'd like to invite up Kristen Applegate to talk about a new traffic signal on College Road in Alexander.
Thank you, Mayor, for this time. So really just a brief announcement to let you all know that construction started to mobilize today on the installation of a new traffic signal at the intersection of College Road and Alexander Street in Princeton. This traffic signal will be installed at the expense of the university. Over the past probably, I'd say, year and a half, we had been receiving some, I won't say complaints, but people had been raising concerns to us about the safety of that intersection. We undertook a study with an independent consultant. That study was provided to Deanna Stockton and to the Traffic Safety Committee, who reviewed the work. The work did indicate that the warrants were justified to install a traffic signal at that intersection. So we have been working in collaboration with the engineering department and the Traffic Safety Committee. So construction is about to begin. Wanted to let you all know that that is going to start. It actually, some work probably started to stage today. We expect the construction to be done by September. The equipment that will be installed will look pretty much just like what was installed at Faculty Road and Alexander Street. So it's the nice black powder-coated finish on the poles. There'll be a push-button operation for pedestrians. ADA ramps will be installed. The crosswalks will be restriped to be consistent with the way the striping is done in other locations. And we think this will be a great improvement from a safety standpoint. Of course, it's not just university individuals that are through that area. It's a neighborhood, the seminary. Lots of folks are going back and forth from the seminary. And I think many of you as McCarter patrons will know that McCarter patrons are able to park over at the seminary parking deck. So various times of day, lots of people going through that intersection. We think it'll be a great safety improvement. There will be one parking space, I think, eliminated in order to increase sight lines at the intersection. But really just wanted to let you know that that all is starting imminently.
Great, thanks, Kristen.
Thank you.
Lance?
Can we ask questions? I don't know.
Sure.
Oh, thank you.
I may not have the answer, but I'll try and answer.
Do you think that may cause, I mean, I think it's a great idea. I jog here on Saturdays, so, but do you think it may cause a little backup when it comes to the, you know,
Right, so
the
John-
circle, the way the circle rolls?
We don't think so. It's going to obviously be monitored closely. John Jar, who has done a lot of work for the university, does work for the town, along with Georges Jacquemart, the university's traffic consultant, has looked at this closely. I know they've been working with Deanna and the Traffic Safety Committee, so you know, that would be a bad outcome. We don't think that's going to happen. It can be timed to move people through the corridor, so to speak. The lights are timed to work in tandem.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you for the update.
Thank you.
And now we come to reports, and we already had our second report, but we'll go back to our first report, which is on 260 Hawthorne Avenue tree concerns, and I'd like to turn it over to Mr. DeShield.
Thank you, Mayor. And again, I want to give a quick update on the progress we have so far in dealing with this issue. As council is aware, at the last meeting was brought to our attention some concerns that arise out of removal and also some construction and removal damage to roots at trees located at 260 Hawthorne Street. The issue was also raised both here in council and also with the Shade Tree Commission at their July meeting. The Shade Commission reviewed the issue. We had members of the Shade Tree Commission actually go out to the site. One of the issues that they did identify was that indicated that the drip line, which is used to determine the tree protection, it was impossible to enforce that part of our ordinance because it encompassed the entire site. And further, that there was then about an 7-foot tree protection zone that was created for the property. that was in place. There is some debris that needs to be removed. And that's one issue that we will need to address in terms of looking into the future. And I know the Shade Tree Commission will have probably some recommendations in terms of dealing with the issue of the drip lines of trees and how do we deal with it on small lots where the drip line of the tree encompasses the entire lot. And that it will be coming back with some recommendations on that area. We also had the municipal arborist has been working with the developer's tree expert to ensure that those trees that were involved with the root system of the trees were actually damaged through the excavation. Those trees, we were wanted to help those trees to survive. So last Friday, developer, in working with an arborist, had their tree expert go out and cut and above 2 inches flush the roots of the trees, clean those roots to ensure that they will stay healthy. In addition, once there's a retaining wall that needs to be installed, once that's installed, there will be organic matter put back into the site with the tree, and the trees will be fed with some organic matter to ensure that the trees have an opportunity to recover from the disturbance created from the excavation. This situation and all situations gives us an opportunity to kind of review our ordinance. As I said, one issue that we definitely want to look at is the drip line and regulations concerning the drip line, and both Shade Tree Commission will have opportunity to further look at it along with members of staff and likely come back to council with some recommendations for adjustments so that we can better protect our trees.
Okay. Thanks, Mark.
I have a question.
Okay, Mr. Limerick?
I'm sorry. Mark, has this ever happened before? Because I'm looking at all the construction in Princeton and the homes that have gone down, and I was wondering, have we ever had to this extent before?
As far as I understand, particularly the issue with the roots of the tree, this was the first time that I am aware of this situation, and again with the ordinance, and that's why it's something we should really address.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Are there any other?
May I ask a question? It's not intended as a backup point. I have one question.
Go ahead.
So, Mr. DeShield, would you agree that the municipality,
I don't know if we're going to be able to answer it, but
Oh,
so
oh,
you can
okay.
like sort of do it
Just
back
one
as public
question.
comment.
so would you agree that there were multiple violations of the existing tree protection ordinance that happened at 260 Hawthorne?
Okay, we can't have that. You should ask all your questions now because is that
all.
it? Okay.
That's all.
Okay. And I don't know if we can answer that at this point or not.
One of the things, this is a great opportunity for us to look at the ordinance and find where there are gaps. We have identified some gaps in the ordinance. The one perfect example is the drip line of the tree. And I know we're going to have some further discussions. There may be some other issues.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Wasn't answering my question, wasn't it?
All right. And so we'll continue with reports and we'll do council reports and I'll start on my right with Mr. Cohen.
Yeah, I wanted to give a quick report both on the Veblen House Task Force and the PCTV negotiating task force. The Veblen House Task Force, I guess, because the transfer of the Harrington Woods property is actually on the agenda for tonight. We're sort of getting serious about coming to an agreement with the Friends of Harrington Woods for the process to renovate the structures on the property. They provided us with a draft agreement that they would like to enter into with the town, modeled on the agreement between the municipality and the Friends of Princeton Open Space at Mountain Lakes. And while we had a meeting of the municipal members of the task force about a week and a half ago, basically agreed in principle that while that may be a reasonable basis for an agreement, long-term agreement with the Friends of Harrington Woods, that we do need an interim agreement while the renovations are taking place, and the municipal attorneys are going to be working on drafting language that we would then submit to Friends of Harrington Woods for their review. With PCTV, we're really quite early in the process, but the municipality's agreement with PCTV with how to share the revenue that comes from fees on the cable providers in town is up for renewal. And again, we had a planning meeting about a week ago of just the municipal members of the negotiating team to talk about principles going forward, and we're reaching out to the PCTV board to schedule a meeting to start those discussions in the near future.
Howard, any reports?
Thank you. Yes, I have two. One, although it seems like school just ended, Human Services Department is starting to run their backpack drive. And so they're accepting until August 3rd donations of backpacks and school supplies for kindergarten through sixth graders. So that's August 3rd is the deadline to donate, and there's always tremendous interest, and it really, really helps a lot of people. And then the deadline to apply for to receive donations is August 10th. So I know we don't want to think about the new school year, but it's coming. The second is I wanted to report that the Animal Control Advisory Committee met last month, and we have reviewed the data on the 2017-2018 deer hunt, and just a few quick reports on that. The good news is that the deer hunt was much more successful this year than it had been the previous year. In part, that was because the Mother Nature cooperated, and the weather was colder, and that made it that helped with the hunt. Last year, there were 63 deers culled. This year, 196. So a significant increase. And also, we're starting to analyze the motor vehicle data, and there was a drop in deer-related motor vehicle accidents. So we know that's also one of the goals. So looking ahead to next year's deer hunt, we're always thinking about ways we can improve the hunt and make sure it's as effective as possible. And we've been talking about, are there additional areas where we could expand the hunt? I would note that it was interesting, there was a significant increase in complaints from the Riverside neighborhood of deer. And that's a neighborhood where it's harder to find suitable areas for the hunt because there are no public lands and the lots tend to be smaller. But one area where there are two areas actually where we'll need to explore the possibility of hunting are the Butler Tract and the RTI property, because those may be sort of the source of why there are increased complaints, especially Butler Tract. So next steps, we hope to have before council before the end of the summer our annual contract with the bow hunters so that they can start their hunt in September, right? I'm looking at you, Trishka, for confirmation. So good news to report from this year, a better hunt, but we need to keep going because next year we've set as our goal 250. Thanks.
Ms. Lerman? Mr. Miller?
Yes, I'd like to report from the IT committee, although I don't know if someone here on the council is also involved in this, that the Office of Emergency Management is planning to equip the police classroom station downstairs so that it can be easily set up to handle emergencies, which they do now. It just takes a really long time for them to do it when we have a big emergency. And they also would like to add mapping functionality that will help in public messaging and also coordination for them. And they, what else are they doing? Oh, and they need some furniture. So all of this is going to cost about $90,000, and we're going to look at this in the future and officially vote on it. But I just wanted to let you know that it was in the works, and if you have any questions, you can talk to Bob Gregory, and I also sent out a memo that I think will be in the minutes that has more detail. But I think it seems like it's a good project. Did I miss anything, Deanna? Because I think you know about that. Are you on that? Are you on the emergency committee?
I am, but
Oh, you are too. Okay, so you
I
guys
don't
know
think
about it
I don't
already.
think it's come up.
no.
Oh,
But
this hasn't come up?
we've only had one meeting this year because I think our first one was snowed out or something.
Okay.
There was an emergency.
It seems like it's a really good idea. It's also I think that the room is going to be tricked out so that we can also use it for training. So it seems like a good thing.
Any reports? Okay, I have a few reports. The first, I don't know if Jenny, you wanted to report on this or add to it, but the Freebie bus has a translocator on it, which indicates where the bus is in real time. And it's on the same system now as the Tiger Transit buses at the university. So there's a single website you can go to, and there's also a mobile app where it's really great because everything's on the same platform, so you can go and see where all the buses are in town at any given location. So the software is called Transloc, and the website is Princeton Transit, which is all one word, .transloc.com, and it's TRANSLOC. And there's links to it on the municipal homepage. And just wanted to put the plug in again. Tiger Transit's a really great service that a lot of people in the community don't afford themselves of, even though it's free and available to everybody. And it goes out to the hospital. That's one of probably the most useful lines.
Yeah, I'd just like to add to that, the app is called the Rider. I think if you search Google Play or the App Store, you can get it probably through Transloc, but it's called Rider, the app. And also to, again, thank the university for their cooperation. It's really exciting.
Yeah, so the money for the technology that went on the bus came from the Transit Trust Fund that was set up through money from the university back in maybe 2012, a little while ago. And I've signed on to 2 immigration-related letters. Just wanted to I let council already know about one of them, which was a letter of U.S. mayors calling for the immediate reunification of immigrant children with their parents. And there was another letter of New Jersey mayors about expanding access to driver's licenses to qualified drivers regardless of immigration status. And I know council had passed a resolution, was that earlier this year, or it was, okay, on the same issue. So wanted to further support the position of council. And then my final report is the Economic Development Committee met last week. Continuing to talk about a lot of, I think, important issues. One ordinance they're very eager to see move forward is to normalize our regulations on outdoor dining, and I'm hoping we can bring something to council in the next couple months. So basically the situation is there's some buildings that own the sidewalk in front of their establishments, and there's others where the public right-of-way goes right up to the building wall. And it's actually easier to put outdoor dining if you don't own the sidewalk, because then it's just an administrative approval. If you own the sidewalk, then you have to go and get a zoning variance. So it basically treating everything like administrative approval. And obviously you'd have to be in a location where the sidewalk is wide enough, but my sense is that there'd be support on council. And so it's just a question of having the lawyers look at it and making sure the ordinance is in place. Are there any staff reports, Ms. Stockton?
Just going to give you a little update on construction projects. We have Walnut Lane is currently under construction. That is an improvement project from Valley Road to Hamilton Avenue. It's moving along smoothly. We do have a little bit of a delay from PSE&G Gas. They need to come in and relocate a gas line for us, but we're still looking like we'll be on schedule to complete by Labor Day. And that, with that project, you will see the beginning implementation of the bike mobility plan with an expanded side path on the John Witherspoon side of the street. And then we're also making improvements at the Franklin Avenue intersection where the athletic parking lot meets the roadway in that area. So a lot of good improvements for pedestrians as well. We also have been notified by New Jersey American that they are looking to complete a couple of construction projects this summer. One of them is Dickinson Street. They'll be replacing the water main and the services on Dickinson. And this roadway is long overdue for resurfacing. As part of their permit, they will be also resurfacing the roadway and removing the brick crosswalks on Alexander Street in that area as well for us, and replacing that with the thermoplastic. The other street that they will be working on is a private road. It's Red Hill Road, which extends from Cherry Hill Road to US Route 206. They're looking to start first with Dickinson. As that project moves ahead towards completion, they'll switch over to Red Hill Road. We're working with police on the road closures and alternating traffic on Alexander as well as Cherry Hill Road for those two. And then the last update is just a little more information on Mary Moss Playground. They've been working hard putting in the landscaping, so if you go by there, it's a big change right now. They will have the playground equipment arriving this week as well, so you'll have that installation ongoing, and then they'll be finishing up with the pavers for the upper tier. So please, if you have time, go out and take a look at it. It looks really great. They're doing a great job with the landscaping. Thanks.
Great, thanks. Mr. Cohen?
Just a quick question on the Walnut Lane. I did notice that several large plane trees came down on the high school side. I had sort of assumed that had to do with widening of the sidewalk as well, but it sounds like there's only widening on the JW side. Can you tell why those trees came down?
We will be widening on the high school side as well, and all of the trees within the project limits of any capital project are reviewed by the arborist prior to completion of the plans, and the arborist had identified all of those plane trees to be in decline, and we do have a planting plan that will be implemented as part of this project to replace those. It won't be a monoculture of plants either. There will be a variety of species.
Great, thank you. Any other staff reports? Yep, okay. Seeing none, we'll move on to the work session for this evening. And I'd like to invite up Julie Dixon. Welcome back.
So while it's opening, thank you all for having us back. We have been very busy, and we have quite a few things to report on, including today we ran 3 charrettes, which were very well attended by the community, hosted at the library, which is such a fantastic facility as well. So we'll talk about that as too. In your council packets, you actually received a couple of little bits of information, and we'll also be referencing tonight the IPS parking contract agreement is in front of you for approval this evening as well, and that's for the single space smart meters. So we'll be talking about that as well and how it relates to the overall plan. And one of the other items that you received in the council packet is actually a little snippet of our financial modeling workbook. And it's very difficult to have it in a printout mode because it's actually an interactive Excel workbook. And it actually is going to really tie into one of the big discussions that we had today, which had to do with the type of rate model that we should be implementing throughout Princeton, which I know we've actually discussed that with you all before. And so I think it'll be really helpful when we get to that part of the presentation for us to really have that engagement. And something that the modeling workbook will allow us to do is using the actual expenses associated, thank you, with the program and being able to tie that all together. So just a couple of the initiatives and some of the updates. And again, because we've really tried to stay engaged with you, I think most of this will just be a refresher for everybody. is that you've already approved the Passport contract, which is the contract that's going to provide us with the mobile payment services as well as the permit management services. That contract literally was just executed just this last week, and the vendor now has that, and now we are pushing them very proactively, I'll use that word, to schedule our kickoff meeting. And that kickoff meeting is also very relevant so that if council chooses to approve the IPS contract agreement, one of the very first things we'll be asking that vendor for is the actual delivery date. The delivery date is really critical when we talk about Passport because there's several functions of the Passport application, which deals with the mobile payment and all of the factors that go along with that, that really have to coincide with the rollout of the smart single space and pay station meters. So all of those two things really kind of come together. It's our anticipation, based on what IPS has shared with us to date, is that we are very optimistic for a mid-September rollout. But per the contract, technically they don't have to deliver until October, but as soon as we have the contract approved and signed, again, if it's approved tonight, we'll be able to have a firm delivery schedule. And that's very important because several factors that tie in with just a lot of the initiatives that we have that we're going to talk about tonight really do rely upon that overall installation date of the smart parking technology. So, and we'll touch on that as well. We've been working with the various technology providers, including the license plate recognition programs that have actually done some demonstrations for the police department. They're fans. They like the infrastructure that they've seen so far, and they seem amenable to any of the technologies that they've really seen, and we've really been able to share with them some of the industry-leading technologies. And I mentioned in our previous presentation that the court is open to one interface, which is going to be important for when we make that overall decision. This is also, without getting too deep into the weeds, this is really important because IPS, Passport, all of those technology solutions, the permit management infrastructure, that will all speak to that LPR technology that will make our parking enforcement staff more efficient in the field, which I'll touch on when I talk about the charrettes as well. The financial modeling workbook, and if we have a chance to go into that tonight, we absolutely will. But what this really does is it allows staff to identify all of the costs identified with all of the infrastructure investments required, and allows us to go in and change the hours of operation, the different rate structures, hourly rates versus progressive rates, and that's something, again, we talked in the charrette about, so I'll save that for a moment. Once we have this date for IPS, which again is really important because it affects so many things and the decisions that are going to go into the business rules that are going to support those, and that will then lead into the wayfinding. And that was one thing we got a lot of support today in the charrette with the public outreach that we've done so far, is the improvements needed for wayfinding and signage. And so our focus really after we get through, I'll say this month's efforts, is to really hone in on that wayfinding. But that's also going to be reliant upon some decisions from all of you, which has to do with that branding concept that we've talked about before. And we're really excited. It was actually the public outreach today talked about the combination of the transit app. So I want you to tell you the public outreach has been working because they were telling us that it had launched. So that's great news. So we did talk a little bit about the parking brand and just the overall kind of transportation demand management approach. And so that's going to be really critical for us when we talk about wayfinding, because one of the things that we've talked about before is really creating a simple, easy message and platform to be able to leverage the directions to the garage or the information about where long-term parking is, et cetera. So that's going to definitely be one of the next immediate decisions that does need to be made, is if we're using the branded or the white label application, what do we want to call it? And that's something that, again, is open to your decision, but that will definitely be one of the next decisions. We've actually already, over this last month and a half and plus, we'll be continuing to work on organizational structure, staffing resources, ways to optimize on resources. We've already been working with the parking operations staff, and we're now starting to work on the parking enforcement staff as well. So that's all part of this kind of overall comprehensive approach. And one of the other items that's also gotten a lot of attention is this whole concept of the smart card buyback. The one thing that's really critical about that smart card buyback is that it really needs to tie in with the Passport launch, because we want to make sure we don't really change anything today. We want to be prepared for when we're launching this whole new smart parking campaign, and so that it all syncs up overall. And that's why I mentioned that the IPS delivery date is really going to then, we work backwards from that date. And the one thing that is critical to all of this is just that ongoing effort for public outreach. That will not change. So some of the initiatives, and I want to thank you all for some of the outreach that you provided on this, is the shared parking agreements have really garnered a lot of interest. Several people that attended the Charettes today were there specifically to talk about shared parking. I don't want to let the cat out of the bag because nothing's been finalized yet, but we have some really great locations that have available facilities that they want to have those conversations. So it's also tying in very well with the launch of Passport and everything that we can do by utilizing the mobile application. What I would anticipate in terms of next steps would be us now having the direct conversations and working with the municipal attorney on those shared parking agreements. So my hope is by the time we come back to you all is that we'll have some progress and hopefully some standardization of some of those agreements so that we can bring those forward as well. We've been participating in several discussions about zoning ordinances and rules, and that conversation is ongoing. But the other piece that's really key, and some of this has evolved out of even today's meeting, is so the municipal code updates have actually proven to be a very heavy lift here in Princeton. You have some very complex ordinances. And so what we've done at this point is we've basically broken them into two parts. There's one part that really is going to focus on the downtown, the paid parking rules, and everything associated with paid parking. The other piece that's really key is the permit parking, the residential parking issues. And I know, having spoken with you before, that we know that there's concerns on both sides for all factors, but I think in order for us to be the most effective, we want to introduce those two updates in two pieces. And so we need to work with staff, but we're hoping that if there is a study session in August, that we would bring the first part in August, and then the hope would be to then follow potentially in September with the other part of it. And I would say that the latter part will be the one that has to do with residential parking and permits, because I think everyone knows there's a lot to it. And with the merger of the township and the borough, there's a lot of, I'll just call it cleanup, that needs to occur as well. And I think there's also a bit more outreach. A lot of the outreach that we've been doing to date has really been focused on the downtown core. And just because of the fact that so many folks have been coming in, we've been talking about residential parking. But my suggestion would be that in order to be comprehensive, we would definitely want to engage more of the residential focus, because everything we've really been doing to date has really been focused on the downtown businesses. And so that's a suggestion to make sure that we're tackling this the most effective way for the community as a whole. So that's what our plan is when we talk about that program. But in the meantime, with the rollout of Passport, you have the mobile piece that will really be synced with the IPS launch. But then you have the other piece, which is the permit parking. And our hope is that's one of the things that we'll be able to launch relatively effectively. And we'll confirm those dates with everyone as soon as we have the official kickoff with the vendor. But I would anticipate that come end of August, beginning of September, we should be in the early stages of being able to implement some of your existing permit purchases and utilizing some of the online tools as well. So that is coming very soon. So I mentioned that today we actually had 3 different 2-hour sessions. We had well over 24 people attending, and we had some pretty vocal folks attend, and we had actually really great dialogue. But I think everyone knows that to date we've had a couple of other open houses. We also attended the PMA Social at the end of June, and we actually are looking at putting some information out on Nextdoor and leveraging in that kind of preparation for some of the permit issues and the residential parking issues. We want to actually do some solicitations online and get some more information. Now, some of the things that we're going to talk about today are we literally talked about every single bulletized item that's on that charrette there. And we first of all talked about the technology that was coming soon, and we talked about some of the deployment and some of the value and benefits of it. We talked a lot about merchant validation and the flexibility of what really can come with the solution. But what we really focused on today, when you really get into the weeds of what we really chatted about, we talked about time limits and whether they wanted to have hourly time limits, like maintaining the 2 hours or possibly the 3 hours. We really talked extensively about pay to stay and the pros and cons associated with that. We talked about the hours of operation and what they should be across the board, and the rates themselves. I will say that in general, as I move on to this particular slide, I'd like to take the name Dixon Recommends off of this, because this was before we did all of the public outreach that we had today. And it's important that I say that, because the commentary that we had today is that you actually had a pretty flexible group of community members that attended, and they talked about the different values associated with each of the models. And there was actually, in the end, I would say, a compromise that was really reached. The challenge that we really had is that we had 3 distinctly different sessions. And so while I was able to share different viewpoints from the different sessions, there were some definite, distinct requests out of each group. But overall, the consensus really did go towards the pay-to-stay model. I would say that that was pretty consistent across the board, where you basically don't have time limits in the downtown core. However, one of the groups thought that if you take that core center nucleus of downtown and you allow the 2-hour time limits in that area, and then everything right outside of that nucleus to be pay-to-stay, and to allow for the escalated rate model, I would say that that's likely to be the compromise. But that basically came as a result of the 3 different sessions, so we haven't had a chance to float that by everyone. But it really obviously came down to the type of business that you had in the end, in terms of kind of what your preferences were. But overall, the pay-to-stay model was definitely something that seemed to be appealing. And one of the things that they really pushed for in general was having that lower rate for the first 1 and 2 hours. So maintaining the $1.25 or the $1.50 for the first 1 or 2 hours. And then immediately on hour 3, you follow an escalation rate model where it basically doubles and keeps going higher, so that the premium of being able to park on street for the entire day. So I would say that overall that was really the consensus, but I will still roll back to the conversation that I had with you on our first visit. If your overall objective is turnover and space, occupancy and availability, sticking with time limits is definitely one of your ideal tools. But one of the things you could consider, and we talked to the group about this too, was the opportunity to consider a 3-hour time limit might be well served for Princeton. And so I can tell you that the technology that you're acquiring, or hopefully acquiring after tonight, can support any of these options. So you're basically set up for this. And so one of the things that we talked to the community members about pretty extensively was, we definitely need to start somewhere. And what we talked about was the fact that this process needs to be very dynamic and open, so that we know we need to revisit it. And I suggested basically quarterly, especially at the onset, to really see what the effects are. Now, I'm not saying you need to make changes quarterly, but you need to evaluate the data and look at the information that's coming back, so that after 6 months of looking at this information, you can come in with a game plan. You might need to make little tweaks here and there, but really looking at it comprehensively so that you can make those adjustments. So it might be starting with potentially a 3-hour time limit is a good place to go, with the potential of moving to a pay-to-stay model. The hardest part you're going to have is that if you go pay-to-stay from the get-go, going backwards to time limits is going to be challenging. So I might suggest an approach of starting with an extended time limit and then moving towards the pay-to-stay model as the next option might be the best fit for you. One of the ideas that I think is relevant when I say that the technology that you're going to have can support this is the idea that initially we were only going to put parking sensors on your short-term meters in order for us to be able to ensure people aren't feeding the meter and staying beyond the short-term time limits. It will require an additional investment. However, putting single-space parking sensors into all of your meters is preparing you for the future of pay to stay. And so that would be the one piece of it where your contract allows for this feature. It wasn't necessarily part of the original model of what we're proposing tonight. However, it's something that can be added on. But this is definitely one of those decision points that if the IPS contract is decided upon, this is going to be something that the municipality is going to have to decide relatively soon, because we need to establish what the rates are going to be, the format that you're going to follow, and I'll mention hours of operation next. Those are really the three key pieces of the puzzle for us to be able to baseline everything else upon. And I say this because if we decide, and I shouldn't say we, if you decide that the hourly rate is going to be X for on-street meters, that's going to then be the domino that's going to start then what should the off-street rates be, what should the permit rates be, and if we have a monthly permit, then what should the low-income service worker permit be. So that piece of the puzzle is going to be critical to the entire flow. So that's why I would say that this isn't necessarily something that we can wait much longer on. And I'll add the issue of hours of operation. So this was the consensus of the group, was for Monday through Saturday. They agreed and thought that 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. would be optimal for the paid parking hours for on-street. And the thought was especially to draw more community members, especially into the downtown, maybe to get your morning coffee, to run your morning errands, not starting paid parking until 9 o'clock. They thought that would be a nice to have, and they thought that that was really supportive of the community members. The other discussion that was Sunday. The importance about Sunday, and this goes back into the enforcement staffing model, is that we know that we need a presence for compliance on Sunday, which is lacking today. But their idea on the hours and the start of the hours, this is where we had a little bit of a different idea, was that the overall consensus was that Sunday should be from 1 p.m. to 6 p.m., and that was in our first two charrette sessions. But in our last session, we had a merchant that came in and said they'd actually rather see Sunday start at 11 or noon because of the merchants and the impact of that. But that could also be relative to the fact that there's not really an enforcement presence today. So it's also something that you could, just like with the rate approach, you could start with 11 potentially or noon potentially, and you could always make that adjustment as you're going through and reevaluating it. The only concern that you really have with something like that is the signs that we end up posting. We don't want to have to go out and have to change those signs every few months. So that would be something that I would say making that decision about the hours of operation is definitely something that could be impactful for your overall signage program as well. So that's really the overall consensus. We talked a lot about different initiatives. We talked about carpool permits. We talked especially about the transition for the employee parking and the fact that we're looking at establishing the on-street kind of all-day passes where we currently have the long-term parking, and being able to leverage that for employee parking. And we had really great reception to that. And as I mentioned, we also had several entities come in that had ideas for shared parking that we think we can definitely take advantage of as well. So education and outreach, I touched on this again, and it's only because of the fact that this will be a critical aspect of anything that we do moving forward to make sure that we carry that message out and inform everyone of what's happening. I really would suggest too is that something that came up today was even having more outreach with the employees. The hope is that if we can establish this employee parking program, we actually go out and talk to the businesses and go and talk and reach out to the employees. Besides the PMA, they even suggested they could host some different meetings to get employees to, or even going to the businesses and talking to them about that. So this is a little bit of a sneak peek. We don't have to get into this into too much detail tonight, because this is really what we want to do is we want to bring to you your code basically redlined with the recommended language that's in there. One of the items, and this is example to identify that 85% target for utilization and some of the code verbiage that could come in. One of the things that you can see, if you can, there's a lot of text up there, but on the right side, one of the items that's been really relevant for a lot of municipalities that have done this is they've implemented the range of parking rates so that you don't necessarily have to bring it before council every time and go through a whole bunch of rigmarole, but establishing that range or threshold that parking can be up to this much. And that's something that you'll see basically coming back to you when we do the actual municipal codes. This is also, again, just standardize the language so that you really simplify where you can have paid parking, rather than listing, every single address and every single street front, being able to say, where posted, and simplifying that message. And it, again, makes it so that everyone's life is easier moving forward when it comes to managing your program. We did talk quite a bit about loading zones today, and the overall consensus for the Shrettes, they really like the idea of kind of where we're talking about the placement of the loading zones and the short-term parking. And so the other thing that we've also very much planted the seed for and had the conversation of is eliminating the existing loading zone permits and really priming the pumps so that people know that that change is coming. And then being able to really leverage the use of your loading zones. The one thing that we heard today was we had considered taking your loading zones and putting loading zone meters in so that during the hours of 11 to 2 o'clock, those spaces would be transitioned into paid parking because that's when you're most impacted. We'd gain about 20 parking spaces as a result in the core. And the one thing we heard very clearly from the business owners was that that was not a good idea because loading and commercial deliveries basically transpires all day long. One of our stakeholders was really keen on being able to repurpose the loading zones at night for your passenger loading and unloading, so places where rideshare could drop folks off as well. And that's something that can be achieved through signage as well. Now, this is going to be very relevant for the no reparking ordinance in terms of whichever policy you all decide on, whether it's pay to stay or hourly rates. A no reparking ordinance is really key so that it especially prohibits downtown employees from parking on street in front of businesses, basically for more than whatever the designated time limit is. But this really comes down to policy in terms of whichever type of rate structure that we have. But the no reparking is something that we'll definitely put in as proposed language when we bring you back the municipal codes. And then it's also important that the verbiage be updated in your code to allow for any type of payment form that could happen tomorrow. Whatever widget comes tomorrow, we want to make sure that your code allows for that mechanism. For example, today, being able to pay on your mobile phone is something that we need to make sure that your code is prepared for so that that way no one can really contest it. Apple Pay, Android Pay, whatever means are available, we want to make sure that your code is written to allow for those types of developments in technology. I already touched on this, but being able to simplify and standardize the wayfinding, and this really goes into that brand decision. Whether you decide it's Go Princeton, Park Princeton, Princeton Park, whatever the decision is, we want to tie that moniker into the overall design. Your stakeholders laughed at this, but this is really true, whether embarrassing or not. I've been here several times now, and every time that we have to find the garage, I always have to say to Allison, is this where we turn for the garage? And if the wayfinding was more improved, I wouldn't necessarily have to ask her that question. So that's just something that I think is really relevant. We also want to leverage the existing parking availability signs on the garage. We just needed to get all of the on-street technology moving forward, and then we want to tackle the garage. And we are going to come and talk about the garage too. I haven't forgotten about that. The green initiatives, there's several items that we know that we want to be able to tie into this overall plan and this overall process, being able to promote the transit program. So that's why that decision on that moniker is going to be so important, so that we can leverage that merged transit application and being able to tie that in together and really promoting, again, the walkability of Princeton. I think that that's something that we've heard pretty loud and clear, is that especially from your residents that are nearby, is the opportunity to really leverage the downtown businesses and, take advantage of those spots. And so the walkability aspect and being able to promote that also can tie into the overall wayfinding as well. So talking about the garage, I just want to touch on this because I know that this has come up in discussion points about the opportunity to potentially remove the gates from the garage. I think before we did that, what we need to do is really focus on pedestrian safety first and foremost, and really look at things that we can do to improve pedestrian access. because I could probably say I'm guilty of it, but I'm not in your garage because I don't want to get dinged by that gate arm. And so the fact of the matter is, I think that there's some things that you can see some examples here from a walkability aspect that you can really look at from a pedestrian safety factor. The fact of the matter is that garage entrance, you know, you've got an older garage, so there's definitely some things aesthetically that we think that you can do. The one challenge that we have by taking your gate arms away is that you actually have a very large facility, and you actually already have limited parking enforcement resources. Managing a garage like yours, basically without gates, is very difficult and cumbersome. It's not easy to do. And so because you actually have really good infrastructure, you have a good, it's called a PARC system, Parking Access Revenue Control System. My suggestion would be is that we first look at things that we can do, like the little green carpet, you know, with the pedestrian on it, and look at safety factors like that before we make other changes. And so that would be my first suggestion there. And then everything that we can do to leverage the technology that's coming into the garage wherever possible, and really being able to take advantage of the validation program that we're talking about for both on and off-street parking. And we know that the library is very interested in whatever we have to do in the garage, and the library's even offered the opportunity to offer some integrations with the garage too, where they can actually promote information in the garage for the library, or sorry, in the library for the garage facility as well. So there's some things to come on this, and these were just some ideas that we wanted to share with all of you. And I would be remiss if I didn't start to talk about permit parking. Residential permit parking, some of the things that are going to come into the code is really being able to define the, I'll just call it the qualifications for what we want to do with permit parking moving forward, and what residents should do in order to be considered for changes to their residential streets. And this is some of the standards that you really want to introduce into your municipal code so that you can consider this for a bigger picture aspect of what we do next. And again, it's really baselining the code. I do want to share that in our charrette today, while we were focused on downtown parking, quite a bit came up about residential parking. And the issue that we've heard probably the most consistently here is, why is there an overnight parking ban in Princeton? And what do I have to do to be able to park on my residential street? So while I won't start to tap into that today, I just wanted you to know that that was really kind of the underlying theme while we were talking about downtown parking. Those are probably the two most consistent things that came up when it was about residential permit parking, but we will definitely tackle this piece with you as well when we come back on the ordinance recommendations as well. I touched on employee permit parking, but I do just want to highlight this as well. Anything that we can do to encourage the more remote perimeter parking, we actually got quite a bit of support from this. And in fact, some of the charrette attendees even suggested, you know, when we talked about carpooling, if there was a way to promote remote parking locations and them to be able to carpool in, and we're like, absolutely. And so we kind of challenged them to go off and identify maybe where some of those remote parking locations were, and to come back with some ideas for that. So I do anticipate we've got a very active group that really attended today, so I think they'll be really looking to give us some feedback about that as well. We talked quite a bit about, I call it the low income or service worker permit. And so by establishing what that on-street rate is, well, again, that domino effect, like I mentioned, will help us determine what the standard monthly permit should be, and also then what your low-income permit would be, and being able to leverage some of those surface streets where we're going to take all of those single-space meters out and put the pay stations in, and everything will be license plate driven. We could actually sell monthly permits at a very affordable rate that would be valid during the daytime business hours as well. So we're really excited about that to come as well. We already touched on this, but shared parking, we're really excited about the potential here, and we're hoping that at our next meeting, now that we've gotten the interest and we've gotten some folks that are really keen on this, is that we'll be able to work with staff and the attorney to hopefully introduce a shared parking agreement and hopefully come back to you with some very viable options. We've got some really interested parties, like I mentioned, and some that I think will be able to help sustain on the weekends, some during the evening hours, and being able to come up with whatever that balance might be for the downtown community. And with that, that is our presentation and update for tonight.
Excellent, thank you. That was a lot of information. I've written down a bunch of questions, and I'm sure everybody else has them too. So maybe we'll sort of start on either side of me and go down. But yeah, start. Ms. Kremler?
Sure. I mean, I have a couple quick questions. In towns that have pay to stay, I inferred from what you were saying that it doesn't really work to encourage turnover. And so even if you raise the rates very high, it still does not actually, you can't do it, you can't make it expensive enough to encourage turnover.
It really depends upon your demographic, and in some of the communities that we've worked in, they'd pay $100 a day. I mean, I know that's phenomenal, but and that's when we start to talk about equitability and access. I think that that's one of the things that you have to be mindful of as well. And I will say this, is that pay-to-stay models for on-street are still relatively in their infancy. So the opportunity to experiment and test is absolutely worthwhile. It's just that we have to be very proactive to keep an eye on it and to monitor it. And the one thing that we all know is that once the barn door is open, it's very hard to close it, once you've really started that process too. And so the one thing we've always talked about is making incremental changes, and that might be something that I might suggest would be more valuable to your community, is start with the longer time limit and see where that goes, and then make your next step potentially pay to stay.
Okay. And then the next question is, it has to do with residential parking, but also with employee parking. That's that you're talking about some policies that are changes from that we've never done. So we've never provided employee parking for private business, and it's a new concept. And it seems like that decision or that assumption has already been made, and maybe we don't need to discuss it, but it seems like it's a policy that we haven't discussed as a council. Like, do we think that the government should be providing parking for businesses? Because we don't do it, we just have never done it before.
Do you do it in your garage today? Do you sell monthly permits, right?
We sell public parking spaces, but they're not, as far as I know, there's no special program for certain businesses. It's all publicly available.
Sure. But I have the opportunity as a business to buy a monthly permit, and I pay a fee every 6 months to purchase a fixed parking permit in your garage. And I would argue, and I don't mean to argue.
No, argue back.
Yeah.
To me, I just wondered about the fairness of it, and
Yeah. Well, so today the fact is that I can buy on-street parking time for 12 hours a day. So I can go to one of your parking meters and I can put money in and I can stay for 12 hours today. What we're simply saying is you're organizing that fashion now so that you can also you're basically offering a systematic, organized way for people to park and to know where they're going to park and where the long-term parking assets are. Because we're also not necessarily saying that area, like for the on-street locations, and again, no decisions have been made, we're suggesting these as ideas, those wouldn't necessarily be employee parking only in those locations. What we're actually suggesting is, with the combination of where we're taking the single space out and putting the pay station in, that's going to be a pay-by-plate location. And so to be able to have that combined with mobile payment, combined with hopefully a monthly permit of some kind, you're actually going to provide a more fluid, customer-friendly way that's efficient for people to be able to park. And so I'm not saying you get that parking space. You have an opportunity to have a permit that would be valid in that location, whether you buy it at the pay station or on the phone or basically a month in advance.
Okay, so I guess I misunderstood. So when you're saying employee parking, you really just mean public parking that will be convenient for employees, but it will not be reserved specifically for employees. It will be reserved for anyone.
Absolutely. I should have qualified it as being long-term parking, and I'm calling it employee parking because it is our hope that is who will park there, and that our hope is that what we can also offer are alternatives so that the folks that park there, one of the ideas that was shared is that if I work at a downtown business and I can show a pay stub that shows that I'm below this, income level, then I can qualify for this lower threshold or lower cost permit. But then the question would be, if a university employee provides that same bit of information, do they qualify for that same permit, or would the policy by municipal decree be that you have to have proof of income to be a resident or to be a downtown worker. That's a policy decision.
Well, it also couldn't it be that the employer should pay that?
I think that really comes down to an employee-employer decision. In some cases, businesses do opt to purchase those, but some businesses require that their employees provide those. The one factor is that the system can be built up to support either. My recommendation is that you would leave that open to the fact that an employer can purchase them or the employees can purchase them, because not every employer will provide parking, so.
Right, but I mean, that's a decision where we would actually be subsidizing an employer who doesn't want to provide parking doesn't want to pay for parking, which, just wanted to make that clear that
Yeah.
that's a decision that we would be making.
Yep.
Good point. Mr. Limmerman?
Yeah, mine, just one question. And that is the Sunday parking situation. The reason why it started at 1, basically, is because a lot of the faith-based institutions actually use the parking areas for their congregations. So to change that to 11 or 12 would be a major, major issue, I can tell you now. And that was part of the agreement when the parking came on Sundays, is that's what the town would do. So that's going to be a major, major hurdle if we decide to go in that area. But
And it was
I just wanted
simply
to
a
say-
business owner that talked about the fact that you have so many people coming downtown for brunch on Sundays, and the fact that the parking restrictions are kicking in so late that all of the parking is basically occupied already, and that there's not available parking for the people that are trying to go to one of the merchants or one of the restaurants. So, and that again, and that's a
Okay.
policy decision too, like you said.
Okay.
So.
thank you.
I have a very simple question, I think, and this is for down the road. When doing public outreach, I know reaching the community, there's something in place, and would be easy to do public outreach for the community. But my question relates to visitors. How do we reach visitors to Princeton on the new parking system?
Great. We actually talked quite a bit about that today. And I think that this goes into the wayfinding concept. And one of the things that we shared today and was fairly well received was, depending upon the model that's selected, let's just assume that there's a core of downtown that maybe is more expensive than the next ring and then the ring out there. One of the things that other municipalities have done is they've actually used color coding. So like the purple area is the most expensive and you can only stay for 2 hours. So when you come up and the signage is all purple, it's clear that that's the premium zone. And then the next tier zone is you can stay for 4 hours and the rate is a little bit cheaper. So one of the ways to be able to communicate that could be the use of colored signs. And it also goes into the signage component and also tying this in. And this is why that decision on the brand is so important, so that the way that we're promoting the information via the city website, trying to tie it into Google Maps or Waze and things like that, so that when people are using different navigation apps and things like that, it's all tying it in together. The smart technology will have the ability to push information out, and that's why we want to leverage also the infrastructure that you have in your garage, so that we can also help push that information out to the public. But being able to tie that in, that'll all come in as we're discussing the brand and the campaign and that outreach. But it could be as simple as utilizing colors. And the folks that attended the charrette today seem to be fairly receptive to that, to be a clean way to message that information as well. So I'll add one piece just because we didn't touch on this today, and I know there was a lot of information. We've talked a little bit about event parking, is that we also have the opportunity with the smart technology to also implement event parking, so that maybe on game days you could absolutely establish a flat rate after a certain hour, so that when I park at that meter, it could be $20 to park that day. And that's one of the other keys, is how do you message that information so that people understand if we do implement an event parking rate model, how do you make sure that people understand that? And that again goes into social media, applications, signage, and factors like that as well.
Thank you. Ms. Howard?
I have a question about revenue. I think if I'm reading right, what you're saying is that basically there's an Excel spreadsheet that you can plug in once you know what your your sort of core decision, business decisions are, right? But one question, I don't know if you know the answer, but maybe Mark will. When did we last increase our parking rates? How long have our parking rates been what they've been?
It's been so long, I don't even know.
I think
I
about
think I
10
know.
years.
It's before I was elected.
Is there a correlation? So, I just asked because we've been, it seems like we talk about our main goal being to rationalize the system so that we're getting people parking where they need to park as long as they need to park, and we're moving people in and out. But I think we need to be honest also that there's probably going to be an updating of rates. That it would be, we would be remiss if we were not doing that, because we've been charging the same thing for 10 years, and every other cost in the town has gone up since then. And by not raising rates, that has meant that property taxes have been bearing the brunt of that. So I don't hate to be like the harbinger of, of bad news, but it seems like that, I'm a little worried that the public may not be ready for that, because we have never said that, that it's been 10 years of the same rates, and we're going to be rationalizing it, but we're probably also going to, rationalizing it also means reflecting that costs have gone up. I don't know if my colleagues agree, but I think it's this important thing to be saying.
And rather than taking one big jump, because it's been so long, you might want to consider implementing a very progressive rate scale so that you do it incrementally over the next few years, but you just build that into your standard rate increases across the board, so that way annually you're incrementally bumping it up. Because today we did talk about going to $2 an hour. And I have to tell you, some of the crew was like, no problem, easy peasy. And then there were other ones that were clutching their chest. So it was definitely one of those factors where I will say, just like we talked about before, small increments, so that way it's palatable, would definitely be something that you just have to get on that path and continue on that path forward, so that you're not shocking people because it's, got to be that big of a jump to catch up with everybody else.
It also seems like you're setting us up with technology that allows us to sort of calibrate and to see what's working, and then if there is an adjustment that needs to be made, you can adjust, right?
Absolutely. We also talked really extensively today about the fact that this really isn't about a money grab, and I think that people really appreciated that. We actually talked about...
But again, like, who are you to say that?
Oh, well, it's more, yeah, fair. Well,
you're not speaking for council on that, right?
Fair. No,
we
fair.
need revenue.
Well, but in the sense that what the objective of the project that you all assigned to us was that it's about managing the parking challenge that you have downtown. So that's what I meant by when I said that, is that they weren't out there like, we're not going out there to write some quota of tickets or anything like that.
No, that's not the goal, but we need, just like we update our dog licensing fees, we update fees all the time. And I would caution you not to be telling everybody this is not about revenue, because that's not totally accurate, right?
Fair. No, but we also talked about the fact that revenue model will also show you what your rates have to be in order to cover the costs of the program. And we talked about sustainability and the importance of the fact that you have to generate the revenue to cover the cost of the infrastructure and the resources required to support it. So, and that's all that I meant by the fact that this isn't what the objective that you all gave us wasn't that you were out there telling us to go generate revenue. You said manage the parking issue.
Yeah, that's definitely true, but I just don't want you to get out over your skis that we have the sustainability of the town.
I gotcha.
Mr. Cohen?
So I have a couple of questions. One was, you were talking a little bit about the possibility of a hybrid system where you would have some time-limited parking and some pay to stay. And I'm curious whether you would anticipate any difficulty with enforcement of a hybrid model, or is the technology such that, it'll be brainless and we don't have to worry about having difficulty with enforcement?
So I don't think that there'll be a challenge with enforcement. I think the key is that it goes back to the issue of how do you communicate that message so that the public understands what the rules are for where they're going to park. And so one of the things, and we shot this down during the discussion, when they had the idea of kind of the core being the 2-hour zone, and then the exterior being the pay to stay. But then they're like, oh, but over here we would want this, and over here we want this. And we said, no. Like, you've got to keep it simple so that if you end up creating these zones, it really needs to be clear and understandable for what that rule is. So to be able to do a hybrid solution, yes. I think we just have to always keep it simple approach, needs to be really mindful so that we're communicating that information, because the hardest thing to communicate it is, what is that rule? How much do I have to pay for that location? And that's why the visual indicators have seemed to work well for other communities.
I also heard you saying that there was a fair amount of sentiment in the workshops for keeping the meter rates low. I think one of the problems we have right now is that there's an inversion where our meter rates are lower than the rates in the garage, and yet the meter rates are the prime, the meter spaces are the prime spaces. And so I guess I'd be curious to know what the discussion was around. And you yourself have said, you know, you set those meter rates and then there's a domino effect that sets all your other rates. I don't think we want to be lowering our rates in the garage to get under those meter rates. So tell me about those conversations.
No, that's actually a really valid point. Today, we truly focused on street. That was really the discussion, but we had that discussion about the fact that on-street is a premium, it needs to be the higher price, and the garage needs to be the affordable all-day parking location. And so you're absolutely right in terms of tying that piece back in. And also looking, like I said, that also affects the permit rates. And so everybody was definitely amenable and understood that. And even when we talked about the pay-to-stay model, understanding that the daily max for on-street could be as high as $30 if that was the case for the escalation. And the group understood that because of the fact that, you know, that's how it should work to be able to take that on-street space. We gave the example of if it was $1.50 for hour one and $1.50 for hour two, and then it doubled every 2 hours after that. And so when you start to talk about your hours of operation, it adds up pretty quickly. And we use the example of like your garage escalation model for how it works to get to daily max. And they all connotated with that for sure, but they all agree that the on-street needs to be more expensive than the off-street. We just, other than the on-street rate, we didn't start to talk about what the rates for the garage should be, because that factor really starts off with the on-street piece.
And the last question, you may have said this and I just missed it, but I heard you talking about our hours of operation in the morning and on weekends or Sundays. I didn't hear you talking about what the conversation was about evening parking hours.
They were all pretty consistent with ending at 8 p.m. on the weekdays, basically the Monday through Saturday. And we talked about kind of the restaurant turn of the fact that, like, if you basically go paid parking until 8 o'clock, you at least get that early, depending upon what the time limits are, and again, the pay-to-stay model. But if it's a typical time limit, you should at least get one evening turn before the 8 o'clock hour. So, but the overall sentiment was not to take paid parking past 8 p.m.
And do you feel like that's consistent with our demand management needs? I mean, are there plenty of spaces after 8 o'clock that we shouldn't be charging for them?
So it's a great question, and I think that this part goes into also your enforcement ends very early. So your enforcement resources leave basically before those evening hours. And so when you talk about compliance, the people who are following the rules are following the rules because they're good citizens, I guess. You know, they and the fact is that there's not really enforcement during the evening hours. So one of the things that we could start to do today, and we're working on this new staffing model, is actually to bring that compliance effort into the extended hours to see what the actual impacts are, because right now we also know that on the university campus there's several parking lots that are accessible to downtown where you can park after hours, things like that. But the truth is we really don't know what the effects on the downtown are because the rules really aren't enforced after, you know, late afternoon.
So reading between the lines, you're saying that we currently don't have plenty of parking in the evening, but we might if we enforce things properly.
I would say we don't really have an answer to that because the regulations aren't being consistently enforced. So my anticipation would be is that you would likely have available parking resources because potentially, and this is fully theoretical, some of the folks that are parking in your downtown core could be evening employees, that would likely park in other locations if the rules were being enforced during the evening hours to allow for patrons to park in those locations. But we would only really know that if we were out there enforcing the regulations. And that's something that is a relatively easy fix. In the interim, it's just a repurposing of existing resources.
Okay, thank you. Good questions. I have a bunch of questions. I'll try to select which ones to ask. Just following up on the cost and the revenue side of this discussion, one of the things I think in your very first presentation that I was struck with was you said if you have a well-run parking system, you're not giving out a lot of tickets. And so if we're anticipating, hopefully, giving out fewer tickets because we make it easier for people to comply, that does have a revenue implication. Although we're not issuing the tickets for the revenue, it still is revenue. And so are we looking at that in terms of modeling the cost of everything else, assuming fewer tickets?
Yes, when we do the financial modeling workbook, we have a compliance aspect.
Okay.
So that you actually can adjust that threshold of compliance to go along with that. So when you look at the average compliance, let's just say it's 40 to 50% of the people that pay, and assuming that you have very effective compliance, you can move that up to the 80th percentile to show that what effect that's going to have on your revenue. So also don't forget that if people are complying, that means people are paying at the meters or paying at the garage. So you have that offset of increased paid parking revenue. And that's oftentimes what you see when you start to implement smart systems like this, is that you actually see a decrease in the enforcement revenue and you have an increase in your paid parking revenue. And that's one thing too, that when you start to talk about the revenue from your parking citations, in terms of, we haven't gotten into the distributions of what you actually receive from the courts, but I don't believe that you all receive 100% of the fine because of the way that the courts process works. So typically when we do these processes, we don't even account for the enforcement revenue at all because of the fact that, you don't want to dictate anything about citations. And so we truly look at just the revenue from the paid and the cost of the infrastructure and look at that balance to show that the program can be sustainable with the rate models as being proposed.
Okay. The other thing I forgot to mention when I was doing the report on the Economic Development Committee is another idea that they're really interested in is setting up a parking bank for when there's a change of use and there's our ordinances say, like, if you're changing from a retail establishment to a restaurant, that might entail you need to provide 0.8 parking spaces. And so the business will go to the zoning board, takes a long time, a lot of money, or even just the thought of that makes them say, forget it. So there is a lot of interest in setting up this program where they can go and they pay some set amount of money or fraction of a space. And have you been working on that with Deanna? And
Yep.
Okay.
And we're also on Friday, we'll be meeting with staff and I think economic development on Friday.
Friday,
as well.
right?
So,
Great. Okay,
yep.
good. One of the things I've heard with the employers who do the parking permits for their employees is that they'll hold on to that permit even if the employee is, I don't know, on maternity leave or whatever it is, because they're hard to get. And is there going to be like a different philosophy in terms of how to do that? Because, the biggest complaint I've heard is like the McLean lot.
Yep.
Seems like it has, all of the permits are out, but when you look at it,
It's empty.
it's empty.
Yeah.
Because people are somehow holding on to them, and it's really inefficient, right? I mean, we're collecting the revenue, but it's not really
It's not
providing
effective
so how do you know how many permits to give out, so that, because you don't want to give out more permits than you have spots, I would assume.
Actually, you do, but starting first is the code, is that so this is where we talked about the flexibility or inflexibility of your existing code. The way that the McLean lot is written into your code today handcuffs basically the way that it can be managed. So that's one of the first things we know that we need to tackle, is to allow for the flexibility. What it's called is an oversell, is that you absolutely identify a threshold for oversell for a location like that. But we actually had one of the business owners who gave us, I think it might have been the similar person that we heard really extensive stories about why they hang on to the permits and the whole 2-year waiting list and factors like that. This new permit management solution will help us manage not only that, but also manage wait lists and also be able to hopefully identify alternative locations. And that really then ties into the shared parking agreements so that we can really try to identify, because there's a need and you've got a list of people that are in need. And so being able to leverage that, and whether we call it employee parking or not, the being able to identify these long-term parking locations and to be able to promote those as alternatives, we think would be very much advantageous for the municipality as well. You really want to serve the need, and there's absolutely a need that's been defined. And so being able to take advantage of that and utilizing, other areas and putting them there. But yeah, that's definitely one that needs a fix.
Okay, good. At one of our upcoming meetings, we're going to be talking about an experiment we just did on Hamilton Avenue, Wiggins, and Hamilton with a bike lane. And I'm sure you've heard about this
Yes.
already, but it's
Yes.
Taking away 30
36.
spots. Yeah.
I've
Is it-
heard it many times.
Right. To put in a bike lane. And I don't know if you have looked at that or how our efforts to provide safe biking in the central core interacts with the parking demand.
We've heard quite a bit from some of your community members about the fact that those spaces have been eliminated and now where all those cars have gone. And so we're facing this issue of the bike lanes in pretty much every community that we work with. And so one of the ideas too about like this long-term parking locations, anytime that we can proactively promote alternatives to be able to, especially with identifying any other locations that you're going to be putting those in at, is to be able to be proactive in identifying it of where we really can offer parking available to them. So I think it's really just part of that outreach campaign and getting ahead of it so that as we look at other locations and being able to make this part of that whole education process is really beneficial too. We've had some community members that have identified where those cars have gone and how impactful it's been on other streets that maybe didn't have a burden before that they say that they do now. I don't have anything analytical or statistics to attest to that. It's just been the hearsay feedback that we've had from the community. But we've heard about it for sure.
Right, okay. And then I have a final question. There have been some seniors, I shouldn't say that. They are seniors, but I think there's some people who don't have a smartphone. And my understanding was the buyback for the smart cards, that would entail taking your balance on your smart card and putting it into the app. But will there be some sort of buyback program for people who don't have a smartphone and don't have the app? Or is it really the message to them, use it now because it's going to disappear?
The message is really use it now, but we do need to make sure that we're looking at this comprehensively too, because some of that feedback's just come up as of late. But right now the intention is use up your smart card, and the hope, if in the case that you don't have a smartphone, would be that you have a credit card, because now at every single parking space, you're going to be able to pay with your credit card. The mobile payment device is an alternative that makes it just really convenient for folks. And the one thing that I would suggest is we have several businesses that want to partake in the merchant validation program. And so to be a user that participates in the mobile payment plan is ideal, because I think there's going to be a lot of benefits that a lot of the merchants want to take advantage of. So I would simply encourage folks to be able to take advantage of those programs, is to participate in that. However, you'll be able to use a credit card at the parking meter as an alternative as well.
But if you're using a credit card, you're not eligible for the validation, right? The validation would only be through the app.
mobile payment program is all tied for the validation, right?
Right, okay. Ms. Krummeller?
Yeah, I have another question.
Okay.
I think this might be my
I
last.
just have a follow-up to one of
okay.
Liz's. So just to clarify, the question about the parking bank really is about land use parking ordinances, which wasn't something you spoke about in the two types of ordinance revisions. So is that phase 3 of the
That's- I
ordinance
think that's
revisions?
fair. That's definitely fair. I will say that's definitely part, that will be in its own little, I should say not little, its own category. So fair to say that that would be a third aspect of it. We just I have to talk to Deanna about the timing for that piece of it, so.
Okay.
So several times you spoke about the, that on Sundays and at certain hours, there is no enforcement, and so it's hard to make assumptions about the parking because of that. But how many people know? I know maybe, how many people know that there's no enforcement? I mean, and so how does that, I mean, are there really so many people that know?
The general consensus that we've heard from the public, and this is the whole kind of goodwill aspect of it. I put my money in the meter because the fact is that the rule is posted there, and I could still get a ticket. If somebody decides that they're out there writing tickets, I'm still subject to the rules.
I think most people are that way, don't you?
I hope so.
I mean,
But
I would-
The general, I will just say this, from our public outreach and the charrettes and the open houses, every person that's come to them has told us that the rules aren't enforced on Sundays. So, and we've also had some I never say the word, antidotes, I can't say the word right, antidote, I can't say it. We've had stories today that, that there's some businesses that actually go out and tell people you don't have to pay today. So, so just different, one-off stories. But again, there are not committed resources that's what they're working on. So we know that that's something we need to address.
And what about the revenue? Do we know what revenue, say, we get on Wednesdays from the parking meters compared to other days?
For Sundays?
What did I say?
said
Oh, I
Wednesday.
meant
I was
Sunday.
like-
Sunday.
We don't have a mechanism really to track it right
Okay.
now.
But we will.
But we will, yes.
Right
Okay.
now, because of the way your meters are being collected, it's basically weekend monies, and so it's not necessarily allocated by, but I do actually believe that, staff can utilize the old system to kind of reverse engineer the numbers. However, moving forward, you will now have the information to tell by hour, by day, you'll be able to do any kind of analysis.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, no, I was just really curious about that because I kind of knew it even though I was on the borough council and I kind of knew that they had never started it, but I didn't know for sure, like you were saying. And I'm on the council, and so I'm just wondering, like, who are these people who are so sure that it's never enforced?
I'd like to open it up if there's anybody who, from the public, who'd like to speak to this. Scott, did you have something you wanted to? Oh, did you move your hand? I was one of those people that do. Oh, you do? No one told me. Is there anybody who would like to say their piece about parking at this point? Yep, come on up.
Yeah, thank you for having me ask questions. So my name is Surinder Sharma. I work with Jenny Kramler on the Complete Street Committee. And we have heard through Diana about the parking, so I'm familiar with it. Some of the questions that I have, anytime you bring new technology, it may be great, but it may fail. So A, we need to have a backup plan in case we don't succeed. And secondly, any new technology must have a closed loop system. Any technology should be based on systems. In this case, our system is, we want to introduce new parking system. In this case, it should be very user-friendly, and it should work under all worst-case conditions. So when I say closed-loop system, we should already predefine what those closed-loop systems are. What is our pass-fail criteria? What is that, number of questions came up, what if? We need to kind of understand those, what if those questions are. And some of those questions will be, for example, enforcement. In a closed-loop system, if this technology works, the enforcement could be actually incorporated into the technology, so we can save some money in order to not to have a personal enforcement person. So that's what closed loop system means, that it should be smart enough that you can take advantage of the enforcement people, and that could be also. The other thing, which is kind of something very simple that we should be able to use, if the person who's looking for where to park, and if the system can define, oh, such and such places are empty, and you should be able to go online, say, I want to occupy that space because I'm going to be close to that business or that restaurant, you should be able to book that and start paying the time that you booked that particular space. So the parking meter should know, oh, a customer is coming and I'm already booked. So nobody else can use their parking. So things like that, there are a number of things that I jotted down that I will, pass it on to Deanna. But the key is the closed loop. Let's rely on the data 3 months, 6 months. Closed loop system can tell you the answers in real time. Real time means you know what your cost is and you know what your revenues are. And this time and age, you can basically let the system take care of it. You don't have to rely on people to take care of that because people will make mistakes, but technology can take care of. So there are a number of things I did jot down, and I'll pass them to
Thank you.
Deanna.
Thank you.
So thank you. So sorry I couldn't.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, so-
No, and I should just clarify too, it's like the technology is new to us, but it's not new technology. So that's one of the reasons we're happy to have Julie Dixon helping us, where it's been used in probably dozens, if not more, other towns across the
Yeah.
country and has been
I
successful
get that
there. So thank
impression,
you.
but any technology is always, you can improve upon it, and that's
Definitely,
what
yep.
we bring in.
Yep, thank you.
Yes, so.
Hi, Julie. I was wondering if you could go back to the slide you had about the green initiatives, and if you could expand on some of the things you had there. You had EV car share, because the mobility is going to change, and I know a lot of your work so far has been on sort of the short-term solutions, but curious to know how the technology and some of the things you're talking about will set Princeton up for sort of the future mobility, where there's going to be more people who don't own cars will be using car services like Uber and Lyft, and sharing cars. Yes.
Or self-driving cars.
Or self-driving cars, right? Autonomous vehicles, right? So you mentioned, having loading zones that are loading during certain hours, but then in the evenings it could be the drop-off location for car services like Uber and Lyft. So if you could expand on that.
Okay. So one of the things that we've actually talked about in previous council meetings is that we know we need to prepare for the future. And so that's where even just the utilization of the repurposing of like the loading zones was a great example of that. And then being able to accommodate, everything from the tour bus drop-off came up today, to, again, the future preparation for the impacts of autonomous vehicles. I've attended several sessions and read several papers about autonomous vehicles, and we are still a good 30 years plus away before it's really going to have a significant impact. It's anticipated that fleet and rideshare vehicles will be the first that start to accommodate basically autonomous vehicles. But even everything from car sharing programs, carpooling programs, those are really all of the things that really come next with this program. So the first piece is making some of the basic policy decisions, and then coming up with adaptive solutions that can basically tie into that. One of the ones that I think can be, we had really good reception to this, I mentioned it, is carpooling, is that those are the types of things that being able to coordinate that with like your downtown community so that they can collaborate together. It doesn't necessarily have to be the people that work in the same shop, but people that work in just the same area, and being able to come up with programs like that. And so I think that when we talk about green initiatives, that's really kind of what we're talking about, is things like that, where we can start to kind of move the dial. It may happen incrementally, but again, those are the things that when we talk about the permitting programs and factors like that, so that in some cases we work with municipalities where carpool permits are free. if you have 3 or more people partaking in those. And so there's initiatives like that that I think you'll start to see some of that tie into it. I think it's really important, especially hearing from council, is that green initiatives are a big part of everything that we do. And I think that it's really important for the path that we're on for Princeton. And so I think that that's been something that's really been an effective part of that. And that's also a reason why we know we had to break out the permit parking stuff as a separate conversation, because of the fact that we know that that's going to have a larger scale impact on some of the direction that we've had from council as well, and some of the feedback we've gotten or received from the community as well. So I will say that it's something that's mindful of everything that we can do if we can put more people on buses. We didn't really talk tonight about this, but we talked before about first mile, last mile. And so there's several programs being implemented in other communities with the rideshare programs where it's the $5 flat rate anywhere within a 5-mile radius. And that's the type of stuff that's really proven to be really effective. And so I think you'll still see a lot more to come. There's only so much that we can cover in one night, basically. But I will tell you that all of those initiatives are absolutely tied into it. We wouldn't be effective from a TDM standpoint if we weren't looking at all of those factors. So,
Thank you.
Great. Anybody else? All right, any final remarks from council? No, okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, to be continued. All right, we have 2 ordinance introductions tonight. The first is 2018-15 bond ordinance providing for the reconstruction of Cherry Valley Road in and by Princeton in the county of Mercer, New Jersey, appropriating $1,001,000 therefore, and authorizing the issuance of $98,446 bonds or notes of Princeton to finance part of the cost thereof.
I'll move it.
It's been moved by
Second.
Ms. Krummeller and seconded by Mr. Cohen. Ms. Stockton, anything you want to say about this before we take a vote? All right, any questions from council? Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Mr. Cohen?
Yes.
Ms. Howard?
Yes.
Mr. Liverman?
Yes.
Ms. Crummiller?
Yes.
Ms. Fraga?
Yes.
And the public hearing, the ordinance has been introduced. The public hearing will be on August 13th, 2018. Next is ordinance 2018-16, ordinance regulating speed limits on Mercer Street and Mercer Road and amending the code of the Township of Princeton, New Jersey, 1968 to provide a speed limit reduction from 45 miles per hour to 35 miles per hour between the Lovers Lane, Olden Lane intersection and the southern end of Mercer County Bridge, number 330.3.
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Howard,
Second.
and seconded by Ms. Krummeller. Any questions or comments from council?
We're glad it's happening.
Okay. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Mr. Cohen?
Yes.
Ms. Howard?
Yes.
Mr. Liverman?
Yes.
Ms. Crummiller?
Yes.
Ms. Fraga?
Yes.
The ordinance has been introduced, and the public hearing will be on August 13th, 2018. We have an ordinance public hearing this evening, 2018-13, an ordinance by Princeton authorizing the acquisition of Herrontown Woods, Block 2901, Lots 1, 2, and 3, and Block 3001, Lot 7 on the tax map of Princeton pursuant to NJSA 40A 12-3.
I'll move it.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved by Ms. Krummeller and seconded by Mr. Cohen, but I'd like to open up the public hearing for this ordinance. Is there anybody who'd like to speak to it? Seeing no one, I'll close the public hearing. Any comments from council? Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Mr. Cohen?
Yes.
Ms. Howard?
Yes.
Mr. Liverman?
Yes.
Ms. Crummiller?
Yes.
Ms. Fraga?
Yes.
And the ordinance has been approved. All right, next we come to resolutions. The first is 18-246, which is a resolution authorizing a contract with IPS Group for parking meters through the National Cooperative Purchasing Association, NCPA, in an amount not to exceed $973,167.50. Is there a motion to approve to get it on the table?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Liverman.
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Krummeller. Are there any questions?
Well, I just want to reiterate what Heather said, you know, that I hope that we make sure that our new rates are going to cover the cost of our new infrastructure, and I was glad you brought that up.
And I just wanted to ask a quick clarification. I believe this includes all of the equipment, both the single space and the kiosk meters, correct?
Yeah, the only thing that doesn't include is the sensor for every single parking meter. It's basically includes the pricing for sensors for the short-term parking spaces. So that's something that if the council decides that they want to go with PSA, the recommendation would be that you would add the sensors to all meters.
But that, I just want to clarify, that can be done, the sensors are separate from the meters, so we can always add them later on, okay. And then I also just wanted to clarify that this money is coming from the parking fund, right? It's not coming from general, the main part of the budget, is that right?
Correct.
Okay. I think this has been moved and seconded already. Are there any further comments or questions? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Resolution passes unanimously. Next is 18247, resolution authorizing the award of a contract to DFFLM LLC, TA Ditchman Flemington Ford. Did I pronounce that right? Okay, thank you. For a 2019 Ford Transit 350 high roof extended cargo van in the amount of $35,312.50. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Liverman and seconded by Ms. Krummeller. Any comments or questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Resolution passes unanimously. Next is 18248, resolution authorizing the award of a contract to Groff Tractor via NJ Start for two 2018 Case 621 GXR wheel loaders in the amount of $333,816.80. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Cohen.
Second.
And seconded by Ms. Krummeller. Any questions or comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Resolution passes unanimously. Next is 18249, resolution authorizing a supplemental PSA, a professional services agreement with Environmental Management Associates for additional groundwater sampling and testing and preparation of a remedial action report permit for the former Public Works Valley Road site at a cost not to exceed $18,660. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Cohen.
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Krummeller. Any questions or comments? Mr. Cohen?
So how bad is the news? I mean, because in reading about this, we need the services because there's a problem, right, on
Well,
the
this has
site?
been an ongoing problem. So this was contamination from the former DPW site. A portion of the soil had been remediated prior to demolition of the buildings. Then the buildings were demolished, and we did additional remediation with soil cleanup last year. So we're in pretty good shape with the soil piece. There is a small area within the right-of-way on Valley Road that still has contamination exceeding DEP standards. But the idea for the piece in Valley Road is that we will deed restrict that land so that it, that you can't excavate in there and disturb that contamination. But we do still have detectable levels of contamination in groundwater. And so the idea is to keep doing the sampling until you get two successive testing cycles where you have non-detect levels, and then you can go through the process of closing out wells. And so they just sampled recently this week, and then the idea is to sample again in about August, September. And if we are successful at that point with those two sampling and analysis periods, then we could move to close out. If not, there may be the need to keep some of the monitoring wells active until we reach that point. The levels are getting very low, though, so it's not highly, a sensitive.
And there's no
concern at this
action we need to take to try and clean it. It's sort of letting it clean itself.
Correct.
Any further questions or comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Resolution passes unanimously. Next is 18250, resolution authorizing a shared services agreement between the municipality of Princeton and the Township of Montgomery for reconstruction of the Cherry Valley Road, 200 feet west of Cherry Hill Road to Mercer County Bridge at Jefferson's Curve. Is there a motion to approve? Moved by
Second.
Ms. Krumiller and seconded by Mr. Liverman. Any questions or comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Resolution passes unanimously. Next, I recommend we take these two together. 18251, resolution authorizing subsidy payment of an affordable housing seller, 124 Brick House Road, in the amount of $25,141. And resolution 18252, resolution authorizing the purchase of an affordable unit located at 140 Griggs Drive in the amount of $105,756.77. Is there a motion to approve those two? Moved by Mr. Liverman.
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Krumiller. Any questions or comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Resolutions pass unanimously. And next we come to the consent agenda, which contain items of a routine nature, passed by single vote. Are there any items anybody would like removed from the consent agenda? And if not, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Krumiller and seconded by Mr. Cohen. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Consent agenda is passed. And is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All right. That was moved by Mr. Liverman, if you didn't hear. And seconded by Ms. Krumiller. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you. Good night, everybody.